The Columbian's editorial board is pleased to welcome Bob Ferguson, candidate for governor. I am Greg Jane. I'm the editorial page editor, and Craig?
I'm Craig Brown. I'm the editor of the Columbian and Columbian.com.
And as mentioned before, we are recording this. We will post it unedited on our website and our YouTube channel. And with that, Bob, why don't you take 1 to 2 minutes, introduce yourself, explain why you were running for this position, and then we will move on to specific policy questions. So
Perfect.
Go ahead.
Thanks so much to both of you, and I'll keep it short so we get to your questions. But I've been to all 39 counties, and the message I have when I travel to all 39 counties is the same. Look, Washington's facing a lot of challenges right now. Pick the issue, we'll probably talk about them, right? Opioid epidemic, cost of housing, cost of groceries, public safety. We're facing some real challenges. And I think what we need is a governor who is a change agent, someone who's demonstrating ability to change the culture of operations, to center the people of the state of Washington in finding solutions. And I think throughout my time in public service, from my days at the beginning back on a county council to being attorney general, is pretty clearly being someone who never accepts the status quo and is always looking for a way to make government work better on behalf of the people. I'm the only candidate in the race who does not accept donations from large corporations or corporate PACs. That is not the easy way to raise the $15 million I need to raise to run effectively for governor, but we're raising the millions of dollars because we're running a grassroots people-powered campaign. I'm trying to communicate that as a governor, I intend to be governor for the people. Corporations have their lobbyists, more power to them. They have a voice in state government. That's the way it works. But the people don't always have their voice when big decisions are being made in state government. And I want to make sure we're centering the voices of Washingtonians, because those challenges we're facing are so significant. Lastly, I'm proud we have a broad, diverse coalition of supporters, of endorsements, whether it's state firefighters, the Seattle Times, farm workers, you name it. It's a big, broad coalition of folks all across the state. And I think that demonstrates the strength of our message, the strength of our campaign, and the type of governor I'd be if elected.
Great, thank you. And thanks again for joining us. I should mention your opponent, Dave Reichert, did not respond to our request for quite a while. And then when his campaign did respond, they said, we'll let you know. So we're pleased to have you. Glad you could join us. But that's why we have one candidate today. Before we move on to specific issues, you mentioned representing being a governor who is a change agent. How do you convince people of that when you've been in state office for 12 years? How would you be different from Governor Inslee?
Yeah, I think what I would often say is past performance is usually your best indication of future action. So when I first ran for public office, I ran for a county council position. I ran against a 20-year incumbent who was chair of the county council, who was a Democrat. And so, Greg, I had exactly 0 elected Democrats who endorsed my campaign. I had 0 support from labor, 0 support from environmental organizations, nothing. I didn't have any of that. It was a grassroots campaign running against the Democratic Party establishment, to be clear. Once I got in there, hey, I supported changing the county council size, the number of politicians, from 13 down to 9. I was the only Democrat to support that. Got that done. My reward for doing that was having my district eliminated by my fellow Democrats. And I had to run again in a new district against another incumbent Democrat, and I won that race as well. As an attorney general, look, I've been taking on presidents of both political parties. My work against Donald Trump was well known, but the first president I filed a lawsuit against was not Donald Trump, it was Barack Obama, a man I deeply respect and admire. The issue was Hanford worker safety issues. I won't go into the details of that, but workers there have been getting sick, working on a very dangerous work site for many, many years, and nothing changed with the federal government. So I met with the workers over a period of months and eventually came to the conclusion the only way to address that issue, worker safety at Hanford, was to file a lawsuit against the federal government, against the Obama administration. I've taken on high-profile lawsuits against the Biden administration. Look, you often read about AGs filing lawsuits against presidents, but guess what? It's always a president of the opposite party. You don't often see it for a president of the same party. And I've done that with 2 different presidents of my party. So I've demonstrated my time as Attorney General and on the county council, the fact that, hey, I'm a proud Democrat, proud to be a Democrat, proud to have the values of a Democrat. But in my public life, there have been no sacred cows. I've been willing to take chances on behalf of the people I represent, to take on my party when I think it's the right thing, to change cultures of a county council and the AG's office, which hopefully we'll get to that in a few minutes as well, about changing the culture of the AG's office, to again, bring a greater voice to the people. And that's been my record. And so when looking ahead to be a governor, look, if that's what people want, is someone who is willing to be a change agent and has demonstrated that repeatedly in their public life, hey, I think I'm their guy.
And specifically policy-wise, where do you differ from Governor Inslee?
Oh, well, look, I mean, we're two different people, with different priorities and different ways of looking at the world. Obviously, we, in many respects, have similar views, right? We're both Democrats with statewide positions, and proud to have his support. But I don't think of this as Jay Inslee. I'm my own person with my own agenda, my record, my focus for what I want to bring to being governor. What I will say is a focus of mine is, and I've talked about this all around the state, is my strong feeling that there is too much bureaucracy in state government, too much industry capture in state government that interferes with state government best serving the people. And look, that was even true in the AG's office. When I became Attorney General in 2013, we have two key roles. One, as you all know, right, we're the law firm for the state. We give legal advice to all the state boards, commissions, agencies, of which there's hundreds. We give legal advice, they do what they want to do. The other part of our work, of course, is we're your law firm. The folks who are watching this, we're the people's law firm. Consumer protection, civil rights, environmental enforcement, antitrust. Taking on the federal government that's taken away our rights. Well, on the first side of the equation, being a law firm for the people, we did great work under Rob McKenna, right, under Chris Gregoire, long tradition of that. On the work on behalf of the people, frankly, we did not do a very good job. Not because we didn't have good people in the office, it's just we often did not do the work at all. For example, if you called our office with a civil rights complaint, the day I walked in the door as Attorney General, we referred you somewhere else. We have hundreds of attorneys in our office. Not one single solitary person did civil rights work on behalf of the people. If you called us with an environmental concern, hey, someone's polluting our river in our community, can you do something as Attorney General? We sent you to the Department of Ecology. Said, sorry, we don't have anyone doing that work. We don't do it. If you want our consumer protection team to take someone to court for violating our consumer protection laws and harming Washingtonians, thanks for calling. We've had one consumer protection trial in the 17 years before I was Attorney General. We had no bandwidth to take on a corporation of any size in court. Antitrust, right now we have a huge case taking on a major grocery store merger. It's a case of national importance. My antitrust team, when I started, consisted of 3 attorneys. Okay, I mean, we could no sooner have taken on a case like that than we could have gone to the moon. We've changed a culture of our office on serving the people. We now have not just a civil rights division, it's the best in the country by any measure, okay? We don't just have an environmental enforcement team, it's a team that holds bad actors and polluters accountable with criminal convictions, dozens of them, and we've returned hundreds of millions of dollars back to the state by making them pay when they polluted and beating them in court. Our consumer protection team, I give you a zillion examples, but a good one is the opioid epidemic. We've taken on the largest corporations in the world, the Purdue Pharmaceuticals, for fueling the opioid epidemic. And the team has gotten grown so much, both in numbers and in expertise, that I could reject a national settlement that virtually all the other attorneys general accepted, Democrats and Republicans, because we had the ability to go our own way, bring our own case, go to trial, and then get a better outcome for Washington and more money for Washington, all because we'd grown that team and the expertise of that team. So that's changing the culture of an operation, right? We've done that to better serve the people. And the AG's office, going forward with the next Attorney General, the office will expect that work to continue. Frankly, you will expect that work to continue, and the people of the state of Washington will expect that to continue. So in terms of being a governor, that's why I want change in state government, to better focus on service to the people of the state of Washington. We'll give you a zillion examples, but hey, why is if you need a permit for a project and the permit's late because of the state, that's costing you dollars. Why do you have to pay for that permit? I'm going to say as governor, if we're late on giving you the permit that you're relying on for whatever project you're working on, you don't pay for that permit, right? Why do we have in state government
let me go back. Would that require an act of the legislature, or how would that be implemented?
I believe I can do that by executive action, but if we have to go through the legislature, we'll get it through the legislature. Another example would be, we have so many jobs in state government that require a 4-year degree, even though that job, why is there a 4-year degree requirement for the job? We literally have thousands of jobs like that. We changed that in my office to open up to more folks do it. Now, obviously, if you're going to be a lawyer, you got to have a law degree, right? There are certain jobs that require a certain kind of degree. That's obvious. But Pennsylvania, Josh Shapiro got rid of that 4-year degree requirement for thousands of jobs in Pennsylvania. It's working great. We're going to do that in Washington. Look, I'm from a large family of 7 kids. I've got a couple siblings without college degrees. I can assure you, the state would be lucky to have either of those 2 siblings working for them. I can assure you that. We're going to change that when I'm elected governor as well. So again, the whole idea is change that culture. Ferry service, you get the idea, right? There are so many things where the state needs to do a better job of serving the people, and that'll be a big focus.
Great, thank you. Craig.
Sure. So let's talk a little bit about fentanyl, a problem both here in Southwest Washington and statewide. So how effective has the state's response been so far, and what needs to be changed?
Yeah, good question. And sorry, the 2, I should have jotted those down. My apologies. You mind repeating? I want to make sure I'm answering the questions exactly. What were those again?
So talk about what the state's done is effective and not effective so far, and what needs to be changed.
Got it. So how's the state response been, and what needs to change?
Right.
Sorry about that. I should have been jotting that down.
You froze for a second there.
Got it. Am I back?
Yeah.
Great. I think what I'd say on the state's response so far is not good enough, to be honest. During my time as Attorney General, I have had many conversations with, for example, many parents who have a child suffering from opioid addiction. And I often hear a story along the following lines. Hey, Bob, my kid got addicted to opioids. My kid's been out on the streets. I lost touch with my kid. But hey, at some point, they call and said, I want to face this addiction. Right? Pretty big moment for that kid, pretty big moment for that family. And the parent said to me, Bob, guess how long it took me to get my kid in the door to get the treatment that he or she really needed? Often it's days, sometimes it's even weeks to get in the door to get that treatment. So as a state, each time we're not able to get that person in the door when they're ready to face that addiction, look, that's a failure for the state. The reason we leaned in so hard as an office on the opioid epidemic, the reason why I rejected national settlements, as I referred earlier, and took some of those entities to court, which is a high risk, if I had lost that case, I'd have some hard questions to answer right now, right? So that was a gamble, to be sure. But the reason I was willing to take that chance was because, to your question, I know how great the need is for more resources to help folks get the treatment that they need. We've recovered now basically $1 billion for the state. One thing I did, I think it's the only series of cases I've done this for, is I wrote into all the settlement agreements when eventually cases got resolved that the money can only be used by the state legislature, half goes there, or by the local governments. I think right now we're up to about $35 million for Clark County and the jurisdictions within Clark County from the proceeds. We hope that the numbers grow as we bring more cases and get more results. I think right now it's 35 million. So for those local jurisdictions, I wrote into it, they can only use those resources to address the opioid epidemic. They can't use it for something else. To your point, because the need is so great. Now, look, we try to be flexible. That can be treatment. That can be more first responders, right? There's different needs we have there, but it's got to be under the umbrella of the opioid epidemic. And so, candidly, the investments we make need to make sure that we're getting folks the help that they need, specifically with treatment, who are suffering from those addictions, which are impacting communities all across our state. So I've been super clear about that in my time as Attorney General and in this campaign, for governor. That's going to be a priority for me for sure.
And in dealing with that, do you think is it most effective to split any revenue between the state and local jurisdictions? Should more go to local? Should more go to the state? What's your feeling?
Well, great question. So there is lengthy negotiations on that with, as you can imagine, local governments want a greater percentage, the state wanted more. You can admit, right? There's a whole lengthy conversation around who should decide, right? The one thing I knew for sure is it shouldn't be me or my office. We're not experts on how money like that should be allocated. So the one thing for sure was it's not me. It's got to go to policymakers who are accountable to the people. And so, Greg, there was, and I can sort of check on the work side if there's more details I can get you, but there was a lot of conversations. Obviously, folks had views about that. In the end, came up with a formula of 50-50 that seemed to work for folks. And I think it makes sense. You know, I'm comfortable with that allocation. That the state has a certain perspective. Obviously, the dollars are all flowing down. Even the state dollars are all flowing down. But I think it makes sense to have the state have control over some of those dollars to figure out where they could best be utilized. And local jurisdictions have their own unique issues they're facing and unique challenges they may be facing. Local jurisdictions can work with other local jurisdictions, right? Some local jurisdictions are very small, so the amount of money they're getting is relatively small, but they can partner with other nearby jurisdictions or counties to pool their resources and make the investments that work best on a local level. So, you know, our approach was, hey, what we thought would work best for, you know, what we're hearing from local governments and the state. That seemed to be a compromise that worked for everybody. And honestly, we've not really had pushback on that. That seems to be a system that seems to be working. At least not pushback that I've been hearing. How's that? Seems like it's a system that's been working.
Greg, anything else?
Sure. Why don't you talk about my pet peeve, if you would, Bob, which is highway maintenance. And every time I go up and down Interstate 5, I have all the potholes named by now. So WashDOT, of course, knows about this and says that they just don't have the money. What can be done to improve maintenance of roads and bridges?
Yeah. This came up a little bit in the debate last night, sort of the infrastructure, 2 nights ago, sorry, the debate a couple nights ago. So, you know, Washington's got a challenge on this. You know, obviously the gas tax helps fund, you know, a lot of our projects and the work we do. Gas tax revenues are going to continue to decline as more and more Washingtonians go to electric vehicles, for example, right? So there are some structural challenges here moving forward as well. You know, what I've been very clear about in the campaign is, you know, this is sort of nuts and bolts of government, right? These aren't Democratic or Republican issues. This is nuts and bolts of government. So my approach is the approach I'd have when I was chair of the King County Council's budget. Now, the King County Council's budget isn't the state budget, but still a multi-billion-dollar budget, right? We make investments like this, as you can imagine, for unincorporated King County. And my approach there, when I was the chair of the budget committee, was, even though Democrats controlled the county council by vote, the way we did our budget was 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans essentially locked themselves in a room for a period of a couple of weeks to go through a budget, hammer out a budget that'd be taken to the full county council. So that's how we adopted a bipartisan, balanced budget that met the needs of all residents of our county. And that's the approach we're going to do here, because guess what? Road maintenance, you know, you mentioned, and hey, the ones you know well from the potholes in your neck of the woods, I hear that from communities all across the state. The good news here is there's bipartisan interest in this, right? And it is a nonpartisan issue, and it's one that I think the parties can come together on, but we need to make those investments, that there's no getting around that, to address that. That's frustrating for Washingtonians when the roads aren't kept up, and that's going to be a priority in the budgets, the transportation budgets that I'd be putting forward. The one thing I won't be doing, I think it was last two nights ago in the debate where, you know, Dave Reichert, I think it was on infrastructure, where he talked about raiding the rainy day fund to fund projects. I think it was in the context of transportation. I might be mixing up another issue, but look, we need to make sure we're preserving our rainy day fund, preserving our AAA bond rating, right? Washington's doing very well from a financial standpoint, but making the right investments when it comes to making sure we're taking care of our roads. And by extension, this may be coming up, so stop me if this question is coming, but there's the maintenance, but there's also the investments on projects like, hey, Columbia River Crossing, right? I just was in Eastern Washington, the North-South Freeway in Spokane, you know, down in Southeastern Washington, the US Highway 12 project. You know, there are big projects that need those investments to complete and that are higher priority. So it's a balance, I think, of what you're raising, I think, which is the maintenance side, but also on these large projects that need to be completed.
Now, along those lines, is there anything more the state government needs to do so we can get a new bridge, or what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think we're making progress, right? The feds just came in with, I think, correct me if I'm 1.5 billion, I think it is, something like that, a pretty significant investment just coming in from the federal government. So a couple things the governor can do. Obviously, one, the relationships with our federal partners is key, right? You know, I'm proud to have the support of Senator Cantwell and Senator Murray, have good relationships with them, of course, our congressional delegation, you know, to make sure that as a governor, we're working hard to advocate for funds at the federal level. And the state's been, you know, successful with that so far, especially with that latest infusion, combined with making sure we're working closely with our partners in Oregon, right? Make sure we're coordinating on our efforts here. And then back to the transportation budget, making sure we're putting together a budget. Now we're going to be balanced all across the state. That's a big need for that part of the state, and really for the whole folks up and down the I-5 corridor. We have big needs in the eastern part of the state. I mentioned a couple of them, right? So in order for a transportation budget to work as a governor, legislature, obviously you're balancing the needs all across the state. But it is more than fair to say, and the reason why I mentioned the river crossing, that project in particular, is how high profile that is. That I understand that as a top priority for our state. I mentioned the debate the other night, even though I was in Spokane. I mentioned that that particular project because it is so important. I use that that bridge and understand how critical it is for your viewers, but also folks all across our state.
Now, you mentioned a couple of times that you have been on the debate stage with Mr. Reichert, and I wish he were here to also answer this. But how do you differentiate yourself from him? What are the differences?
Oh my gosh.
Briefly.
Yeah, I'll try and keep it short. I mean, I guess what I'd say is the differences are pretty profound. And I think anyone who's watching the debates or listening to us speak about key issues, would see that. I will say at the outset, it speaks volumes that he's not willing to come on and do this interview. He refused to interview with the Everett Herald. He refused to interview with the Cascadia Daily News. Only he can answer questions why he's not willing to come to a forum like this and answer questions from our media partners all around the state. That's a contrast, number one. I've never been shy about getting in front of groups, individuals, and answering questions as best I can about my vision for the state. But I do think a governor should be showing up in conversations like this and communicating with the people. Number two, look, on core freedoms, Dave Reichert is wildly out of step with the overwhelming majority of Washingtonians. He's anti-choice. He went back to Congress and voted 3 times for nationwide abortion bans that criminalize doctors. He voted many times to defund Planned Parenthood. Look, in contrast, I'm pro-choice. I'm pro-choice. I'm proud to be pro-choice. I've taken on a president of my own party, Joe Biden, to ensure access to mifepristone, the abortion medication used in the majority of abortions in Washington state and across the country. There's a clear contrast there. Healthcare. He went to Congress and voted dozens of times to repeal or gut the Affordable Care Act. Look, your viewers know how important that is. If you got a pre-existing condition, to Dave Reichert, you're invisible. He voted to gut your coverage for your pre-existing conditions for thousands and thousands of Washingtonians. If he had his way, your prescription drug prices would go up if you're a senior. I was proud to help defend the Affordable Care Act when there was a legal challenge to it brought by Republican attorneys general. Donald Trump, he said, "I love Donald Trump's policies," a direct quote on audio. He says, on policy, we're aligned. Look, I have a pretty fundamental disagreement with him on Donald Trump's policies, and do not think that he's anywhere near in touch with the majority of Washingtonians. He denies that humans contribute to climate change. Look, one can have a reasonable debate about what's the right investments for the state to deal with climate. That's a reasonable debate. What kind of projects, how much we should invest, that's a conversation folks can have. I do not think we can afford to have a governor at this stage of our state's history who denies the science behind climate change. We need to have a governor who understands the science and embraces the science and will act accordingly. And finally, on sort of issue after issue, there are those disagreements. But hey, just the way we run our campaigns. I mentioned earlier, I don't take donations from large corporations or corporate PACs. I've always been a people-focused politician. And I think that's in real contrast to Dave Reichert. It's unclear to me we've had 2 debates, what he has said about his actual record in Congress, what he's done that has best served the people. I've been very clear. We've talked already about multiple cases I brought on behalf of the people, and we're just getting started of work we've done on behalf of the people to help make life a little bit better for the people of Washington state. So I think there's a clear contrast. The last one I'll say is, when the Seattle Times endorsed me in this race over Dave Reichert, one thing they said, which I appreciate, is they said that we have the most, by far, detailed policy positions of any campaign for governor. They're on our website, bobferguson.com, on a whole range of issues. I'm trying to be as clear as I can on a whole range of issues. The Seattle Times also said that I was fearless. And that doesn't mean they agree with me on everything. They don't, and they're clear and they don't agree with me on things. But I appreciate the fact that they use that word about my time in politics. I'm just willing to take on tough cases, willing to take on tough fights on behalf of the people. And I think that's a clear contrast with Dave Reichert, who has continued to say one thing in debates when he thinks the people are listening and something else entirely when he's speaking behind closed doors on a whole range of issues.
And you mentioned climate change. Mm-hmm. The state has taken a broad effort to address climate change with the Climate Commitment Act, which may or may not be overturned by voters in November, be repealed. If that is repealed, if the capital gains tax is repealed, that obviously would impact the state budget. How would you guide the legislature in dealing with those vast changes?
Yeah, and to say that if those two initiatives, if those two measures are repealed, if those two initiatives are adopted, that would impact our state budget is obviously an understatement. I mean, that would have massive implications for our budget. Capital gains tax is just one example that has hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars for rural school construction, for early learning programs, childcare. I mean, and by the way, Dave Reichert's comfortable with cutting that funding. He's comfortable with that. I am not. And Climate Commitment Act as another example, those are significant investments all across our state into a clean energy economy. That's not just good for clean air and clean water, that's good for jobs. When I was in East Wenatchee recently, I went to an apprenticeship training program as electrical workers. It's like 600 or 700 workers they have being trained. What are they being trained for? Clean energy economy. Those jobs are coming. I support that. Now, to your question about the budget implications, that's really impossible to answer, right? I mean, so if it happens that those two initiatives are, if they pass, the budget implications, I said, would be very significant. That's going to take a lot of sitting down with both parties in the legislature to figure out how best to prioritize in light of that. How do we fill those gaps in early learning programs for kids in childcare? How do we fill those gaps on rural schools? When I was in Republic, Washington, the folks I talked to were concerned about the physical state of their school. Well, guess what? Right? That's going to be make it more difficult to help out the folks at Republic and other communities across the state where on the infrastructure of their schools, they've got schools that are failing. So that's going to be, hopefully we don't get to that point. The only way out of challenges like that is you've got to sit down, make hard decisions, and prioritize. Each of those issues I mentioned are priorities for me, but we've got to live in a real budget and pass a balanced budget. And I want that budget to be bipartisan. That's my approach. So, I don't have a specific answer for you, obviously, Greg, because I'm hopeful those funds will be available, that those funds won't be removed. But, your viewers should know Dave Reichert's comfortable with cutting those funds. And he has said nothing about how on earth he would possibly compensate for the loss of those revenues.
Right.
Last question from me, I guess, is about education funding. So there was quite a bit more devoted to education funding. So local school districts say that they're still short. I'm wondering if what the state's role is going to be in helping them, and also whether you see a lawsuit similar to McCleary on the horizon as districts are set more toward operating with local levy money.
I guess I'm taking the latter one first. Hard to predict. I mean, it's on terms of whether there's more litigation. I don't think I'm the right person to ask. I think it's probably best for school districts to ask that question. I don't know. And obviously, I've got an official capacity. If there's a lawsuit against the state, I've got to be mindful about my answer, just because we have a legal side over there. But on the first question, I mean, just to add on to what I've already said about, hey, there'd be potential cuts if those initiatives pass. That's going to make it even harder. But it's worth pointing out for this conversation that the percentage, so post-McCleary, you mentioned McCleary, post-McCleary, the percentage of our state budget that goes to K through 12 education has gone down. Okay, so that's just the priority of where our budget's going. The percentage of dollars that have gone to K through 12 education has gone down. That's going to change if I'm governor, right? My mom was a special education public school teacher for many years. Guess what? While the percentage of our budget has gone down for K through 12 education, the needs have gone up significantly. In no particular order, but I'll just highlight a couple in the interest of time. I mentioned special education. The number of students in special education programs and with those needs has gone up significantly in the state of Washington in those years. It's not going down. When I've traveled to all 39 counties and met with educators all across the state, when I ask educators, hey, what do you see as the most significant need for the work you do? I'm not exaggerating when I say mental health, mental health, mental health are the top three things they mention. And that's often the focus of the conversation. That's not just a COVID situation. It's continued long past the end of COVID. The mental health issues in the classroom are difficult for those kids, obviously, who are struggling. Also difficult for the classroom learning environment as well. Those educators talk about the need for more mental health counselors in schools. We are woefully underfunded and under-resourced on that. So again, the needs that we have are only growing, but the percentage of our budget that's going to education has gone down. And look, the budget is a reflection of priorities. And I prioritize as an attorney general. I'm proud the Tri-City Herald referred to the way I run my budget as says Ferguson runs his office like a business. I'm proud of that. That's what we try to run it, to get the most bang for the buck for all of our dollars, prioritize and best serve the people. If I'm elected governor, the budgets you will see from me going to the legislature will be increasing the percentage of our budget that goes through K through 12 education.
And regarding the budget as a whole, in recent years, the budget has expanded much more quickly than population growth or inflation. Are the people getting their money's worth in general from the state budget?
I mean, I think what I would say is that the state can and should improve that, right? If you talk to someone who lives on an island community, are they going to feel like they're getting their money's worth with ferry service? Hell no. Heck no, they're not, right? I mean, and that's putting it very, very mildly. So, like a lot of things, Greg, it's a little hard to answer, right? Because it's a little broad, right? I just use ferry service as an example where folks have a very strong view that the state is not anywhere close to adequately meeting their needs. Childcare. Look, the percentage of one's budget that goes to childcare, is a fraction of what folks are actually paying right now for childcare across our state. And that hurts small businesses, that hurts our economy, right? That hurts our whole state. So the needs there would certainly be insufficient for the needs that we have for the state of Washington. So, I don't want to say there's not any part of state government that isn't working in a certain area. Of course there are. It's a complex, large entity. But if I'm elected governor, my approach would be to prioritize a key area, which we haven't mentioned yet. If it's coming up, stop me, but housing. We have a real challenge when it comes to housing in this state. And I'm often asked in traveling to all 39 counties, I'm often asked, hey, Bob, what issue did you hear the most? The answer is housing, cost of housing. In community after community after community, large and small, red jurisdictions, blue jurisdictions, this came up all the time. And so, that's going to be a real focus for my administration. I put in my voters pamphlet statement that in my first 4 years as governor, we're going to build 200,000 units of housing of all kinds, affordable housing, market rate, housing for the unhoused, for the homeless. We're going to put that in my first 4 years. A lot of members of my team said, Bob, don't put that in black and white in your voters pamphlet statement. If you get elected, that might come back to bite you. I said, no, we're going to put in black and white. So I am accountable to that, to the people of the state of Washington. We need more inventory. As a state, we need to streamline our processes so folks can do the construction. And frankly, we've got a wealth of opportunity with the business community. When I've had conversations with the business community, when they talk about the need for housing, that can be big corporations or small businesses. I had within the same day a meeting with big executives from some of our biggest corporations. What they want to talk about is housing. Hey, that their workforce can't, they can't attract the workforce they need because housing's too expensive. And that same day I had a conversation with a restaurant owner from the east side of the mountains in a smaller town. And he said he's had to scale back the number of hours his restaurant is open. It's been there for many years because his workforce can't afford to live nearby his restaurant. So he has to scale back his hours. Small, right? Business, restaurant, Eastern Washington, and Microsoft over on the west side. It's exact same issue. So one thing we'll do to get the accountability on making these changes is I'm taking housing, which is buried in the Department of Commerce, and I don't want to bore you with the intricacies of state government, but Department of Commerce is huge. The head of housing is going to be a cabinet level position. That person will sit at my cabinet level meetings. So they're looking at me just like I'm looking at you guys. every single week. And I've got my number of this $200,000 number we need to meet. I'm going to get reports every single week on how we're doing at meeting that. And I'm going on a little too long on this point, but it is important. Hey, the business community, when I met with them, they don't just say, hey, Bob, we want you to solve this issue, Governor. They say, we want to be partners. We want to help invest. We're interested in public-private partnerships. We want to be part of the solution. This is a message I hear over and over again. And so I'm really convinced that because it's an issue that impacts Washingtonians all across the state, that there's bipartisan interest in addressing this. I'm convinced of that. I'm also convinced that 90% of solving any political problem is getting everybody in the room to agree there's a problem that needs to be solved. And I'm convinced members of the legislature agree this is a problem that needs to be solved because they're hearing about that from their own constituents. And I think we have a lot of tools in our toolbox to help improve the housing situation. So that's going to be a top priority as well.
Yes, and we were going to ask about housing.
Sorry, yeah, I jumped ahead of you guys. Sorry on that. Yeah.
You got to ask about housing.
Yes, exactly. Let's see. Well, Craig, anything else?
No, those hit all my hot points here.
Bob, are there any major topics that we haven't touched on?
Good question. I think we covered it. Let me just, I did jot down a few notes to see if there's anything I'm missing here. No, I think you guys covered a lot of the main points. So I don't think I've got much else to. I guess the one thing I will add, maybe just one thing. I'll be brief. Is on the public safety side. The first plan that I put out was on public safety. A key cornerstone of that plan is, Washington ranks last per capita of number of law enforcement officers we have. Look, that needs to change. Obviously, most of the hiring is done by local jurisdictions, of course, right? We have the state troopers, so I have some control there, on the budget for the state troopers. But the local law enforcement hiring, of course, is done at the local level. But what we've seen some governors do is put into their budgets resources that local jurisdictions can draw upon because they've got their budget challenges for hiring bonuses or increased salaries to attract law enforcement to their communities. And so my first budget, that's a priority for me. I've detailed that, and that's something that needs to change. We need to have more law enforcement serving all across our state. So that'll be a top priority if I'm elected governor. So that may be the one thing I'd maybe add to the conversation.
Okay, sure. Great. Well, with that, then, what do you give us your final pitch for why voters should support you, and we'll go from there.
I think what Washingtonians want is a governor who will defend their core freedoms, like reproductive freedom, while at the same time understanding that we face serious challenges. The status quo is not acceptable, and to go with somebody who's demonstrated a willingness to take on their own party, a willingness to do business in a different way as an office, to lean into those challenges. And I think by any fair measure, that's been my history in local government, and certainly my history as an attorney general, where the work we've done has focused on serving the people of the state of Washington. I'm going to take that same approach as governor to make sure that we're cutting down the bureaucracy and making our operations as a state government focused on the people. And that's what they can expect if I'm governor. And just really appreciate you taking the time to ask the questions and the interest in the campaign as well.
Well, thank you. Thanks, Bob. Appreciate it.